Abby and I both work for the Nature Conservancy, and we're both in Santa Fe, so pretty close by. And we both love and have worked in the Jemez Mountains for years and years. So we feel really close to a lot of the issues that concern you, including the, Las Conchas fire and the Cerro Grande fire and those things that have affected the forest so much. So we are working actively on trying to do some restoration work. And part of that restoration work is planting trees. And Colin is going to talk a little bit about the overall project and who's involved and kind of what the objectives are. And then we'll kind of go into how to use the TreeSnap app and its relationship to the project.
Cool. Thanks so much, Ann. And again, thanks to everybody on the phone for joining, and thanks to PEEC for hosting us, longtime partners with PEEC. And so we really appreciate all you do for the community, and really appreciate your partnership on this. So I do have a short little presentation that I think will help put everything in context. So Kristen, if you don't mind taking down, there you go, sweet. So before we get into, discussing the details of this project, I just wanted to spend some time, I can't call out all of our partners on this project by name, but just wanted to acknowledge that we've been working in this post-fire environment in the Eastern Jemez for, 5 or 6 years now, if not longer. And none of the work that we do in conservation is done alone. And it all has equal parts ecological and environmental component and community component. So many folks here are familiar with some, if not all, of the logos on this sheet. So really appreciate all of the support that we get from our partners who've chipped in, funding, time, and literal sweat and Zoom call, and many hours on Zoom the last couple of months. So really, as most of you know, what we're dealing with in the West is a changing fire regime and a changing characteristic of fire behavior. So this photo is taken off of my front porch when we lived up in Los Alamos of the first day of Las Conchas. So pretty significant fire behavior. And what's resulting, from this kind of fire and this kind of smoke and fire effects is what we call high severity fire. And it's essentially tree killing fire. So this map is an aerial view of the Jemez Mountains, and you can see, most of you will recognize the outline of Bandelier National Monument in white with the Valles Caldera and that big paw print, that big bear paw print, and then the town site of Los Alamos tucked in there with the National Lab and everything. So what we've highlighted here is just the high severity fire, the fire that results in high mortality of trees. And this is uncharacteristic for our forests in the Southwest, which have evolved largely with low severity fire as the dominant fire type in the Jemez Mountains. So we'll just go through a few of the decades. So this first image is the 1970s, and then we actually skipped the 80s because they were so wet, and it resulted in really awesome skiing in the decade of the 80s, but also not a ton of high severity fire. So we jump ahead to the 90s, and we see a couple fires popping west of Bandelier, the 1996 Dome Fire, and then north of Santa Clara Canyon in the Oso Complex in 1998. Then 2000, early 2000s, so this is the decade of the 2000s, the big red splotch is Cerro Grande, of course, which many of you remember, and I'm sure some of you have lived through it. And so you see the high severity fire patches there, which are still the remnant treeless areas outside of Los Alamos now, which the new PEEC building, when we're allowed to be back in it, has a beautiful view of the sort of recovering slopes of the rim of the caldera. And then we jump to the 2010s, and of course, Las Conchas is the dominant in this red area here, 150,000 acres of fire. Much of that was high severity in this tree killing patch. So this is what you see when you drive up, into the Jemez Mountains to cut a Christmas tree or get firewood. You go down 289. This is that big patch there west of Bandelier. And of course, Santa Clara Canyon and Santa Clara Pueblo had several high severity patches, which resulted in a lot of flooding and devastation in that canyon. So the question really in front of us, is what is this? Is this a one-off for the Jemez Mountains, or is this something that we're seeing across the state? And the reality is, unfortunately, we're seeing this kind of fire behavior spread across the state. So our colleague Owen Burney, who I stole a bunch of slides from, he's put together some calculations working with some colleagues at the Nature Conservancy, and has calculated that somewhere between 2 to 2.6 million acres of forest are in need of reforestation following fires or drought. So what we're looking at is about 300 to 650 million seedlings. So pretty enormous numbers when you start to think about what our current capacity is with nurseries, and we'll kind of get into that in just a second. But this is a problem. This is an issue that is not soon to go away. And New Mexico was fortunate in 2020 to skip the worst of the fires that we saw many fires in California, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado that were much worse than anything we had in this state in 2020. But as we know, our forests are at risk of severe fire. And this kind of pattern is growing in the West. So we see not only is this a New Mexico issue, but it's a West-wide issue. So since some of our colleagues, Sean Parks and John Abatzoglu, put together a paper that was published just this year that showed an 8-fold increase in high severity. So again, tree killing fire across the West. So the need for reforestation is continuing to grow and continuing to sort of expand at a pretty high rate since the 80s, since that wet decade, at least in the Southwest. So the question in a lot of these areas is whether or not we should plant, whether or not we should intervene. And I think the answer is the typical kind of science answer, the typical land management answer, and that it depends. It depends where you're at, what your goals are, what your hope is for the future of that patch of ground. And in some places, reforestation may be the right choice, and in some places, reforestation may be it may not be necessary, or it may not be the right avenue to go down. And with the Nature Conservancy, we really always strive to take a science-based approach to any of the work that we do. And so we struck out in the Eastern Jemez, in the footprint of the Las Conchas fire, to sort of understand, where might we want to engage in reforestation work, what partners, what might we want to work with, and how do we develop a scheme to do this reforestation in a science-based way that looks, not only to the past to inform our decisions, but also into the future, especially as our climate continues to warm. And what we did was work with colleagues at the U.S. Geological Survey to develop a map of suitable reforestation needs. And so this is a simple model of where we might want to put, where we might want to do some reforestation work, plant some trees, and it incorporates both the distance from a natural forest edge, so that we're not reforesting in places where we may, where nature may do it for us, And we're also looking at the climate in kind of 2100. So forecasting out, 80 years from now to say, this is where these trees might be able to survive, so looking not just at where the trees were historically, but where the trees may be best suited in the future. And so this index is kind of the higher the number, the more suitable the area. So you can see a lot of suitability in the northern part of the fire footprint in the Santa Clara Canyon, and then some modest or moderate suitability in the headwaters of Frijoles Canyon and kind of the boundaries of Bandelier National Monument, Vice Caldera, and the Santa Fe National Forest. So that's where we're concentrating our reforestation effort for 2020 and 2021 to plant 100,000 trees in that footprint. And we're using a new style of tree planting called nucleation, where we essentially go out and plant seed islands in the middle of these burn patches, so that when those forest stands grow up, they're able to sort of seed out into the burned area and create that natural cycle of regeneration. And we've been working with a nursery in Mora, New Mexico. It's run by Owen Burney and the New Mexico State University. And it has a capacity to create about 300,000 seedlings a year. So if you remember back to that slide earlier where we're talking about millions of trees, we're really at a capacity limitation. But planting 300,000 seedlings a year is a really great start. And so if we can just get this nursery humming at full capacity, I think that'll be a great step forward. And all of the innovative practices that they're able to employ are actually helping our trees survive better. And they're actually creating seedlings that are sort of ready for the drought conditions of the Southwest. And so from an ecological standpoint, we're growing the seedlings that we need to plant in this nursery using the local knowledge and the local expertise. And we're also engaging with multiple partners, including our tribal partners, to help with the reforestation. So again, as we go through and do this planting effort, we're really focused on making sure that we're planting for ecological resilience, but also cultural vitality. And so a lot of the species that we're choosing are in consultation with our Pueblo partners when they're telling us that species like Doug fir, which are important to their ceremonies, they're not able to harvest from those species because of the fire. And so reforesting with that species helps create, maintain that connection with place that's so important to the Puebloan way of life. As we kind of take a step back and zoom out, we've really started to take a systematic approach to how we go through this reforestation, what we're calling the Reforestation Pipeline. So just all of the different steps in the reforestation process. And we've talked about, planting and the different species that we choose. We've talked about the nursery. All of this starts with seed. We can't do anything. You can't plant a single tree if you don't have any kind of seed. And so that's the point of the conversation today. And that's the point of the Tree Snap app, which we'll get into in just a second. But, it sounds silly, but without any sort of seed, we can't plant trees. I mean, anybody who's gardened, anybody who's grown any vegetables understands this pretty well. But it's one thing that's overlooked in the reforestation conversation. And so it does remain our biggest challenge. And that's where we hope that the community scientists and everyone on this call and everyone listening to the recording can really help us out by identifying some seed sources in the Southwest especially. And I think as we go through this, we're really learning not only about how to do seed collection in an efficient way, but how to make sure that we're capturing the genetic material that's in those seeds that will be the best seed for that future climate. And so the way we think about it is really trying to capture and collect seed from the harshest site, but from the best tree. So we want to go out and look at a site that's really hot and dry, and then pull in the seed from the tree that's thriving at that site, sort of assuming that it has some genetic, it has some genotype or some genes in there that are making it and allowing it to really thrive on that harsh site. And as we kind of go through all of these, with that seed, that provides us so many different opportunities to invest in, again, in the genetics, invest in diversity, not just species diversity, but within species diversity, so that we're able to be really systematic and targeted with the reforestation efforts, and even explore ideas like assisted migration, of bringing species from hotter and drier locations, or bringing genotypes or sort of varieties of a species within a specific a hotter, drier portion of the range, bringing that up into what's now a cooler, wetter place, but may in the future turn hotter and drier as we continue to warm up. And the reality is, when we look at our seed banks in the Southwest, we're just finding that we're kind of broke. The last major seed collection, systematic seed collection, was done in the 1970s and 80s, when timber sales were still very common in the Southwest, and part of the timber sale money would get pulled back, and that would be used to collect seed so that we could reforest after the logging operations, to keep that sort of economy going. But because the timber industry has kind of fallen to the wayside, we no longer have that sort of steady seed collection opportunities. So all of those seeds that are sort of sitting in the freezers, in the coolers at the nurseries, are getting to be 30, 40 years old, and the viability is just starting to drop. And so we don't have, of the small amount of seed that we have left, we don't have very many more years where it can still be viable. So our goal is really to ramp up our seed collection effort. And in 2019, we collected 350,000 seeds during a mast year. So a mast year is just when all of the trees in the region, get tuned into the climate and the weather patterns, and they all just start producing seed. And we were able to tap into that, pretty effectively, but mast years happen about once a decade. So what we know is that even though these mast years happen sporadically, every year there's some background level of comb production and seed production, and that's really what we're trying to tap into with this app, with the community scientist, is that it's harder for us to go out and find those individual trees that for whatever reason happen to be putting on a lot of cones, or a stand where it happened to get that one storm in August that rolled through and dumped a bunch of rain right there on that small area, and that's what allowed those trees to produce a bunch of seeds. We understand that you all are out hiking around, walking around, exploring, have the eye for it, and so what we hope is to be able to use your knowledge, your knowledge of the landscape, your knowledge of sort of the botany and the anatomy of a tree, and try to make it easier for you to help all of us kind of work together to collect those information on seeds. So I'm gonna jump into a demo here, but I'll pause and just see if anybody has any questions as I'm kind of setting that up. Or Ann, if there's anything you wanted to add before I step into this demo.
Yeah, actually what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, Colin, is at this point kind of share my screen for a second, and just kind of share the actual home page for TreeSnap. In a second. Sorry, one moment. So while I'm setting this up, and then we'll walk through the actual app itself. I wanted to give you a little bit of background because this is another important partner that we've been able to work with. And believe it or not, they actually, these are two universities in Kentucky and Tennessee. And so I wanted to give them full credit. So can you see my screen now?
Yep, we got it.
Great, okay. So TreeSnap was developed by scientists at the University of Kentucky and University of Tennessee in their extension program. And you think, well, what's the relationship to what's going on in Eastern forest to Western forest? But actually the app was designed to track tree diseases. Some of you may know the plight of the American chestnut, for example. And there are a lot of imported insects and diseases that are affecting other deciduous trees and trees as like I'm not thinking aspen, but hemlock, which is a coniferous tree. And so what TreeSnap does is allow citizen scientists like yourself to go through and sort of track the trees as they see them and track their health. And then that data will go back to the scientists that are participating. And so let's see here, this is kind of slowly coming up. So here's an example map that you can see. Here's some like chestnut, and there's people that have collected. And in this case, it's again in the Eastern US, but you can see there's sites that have been collected by different individuals. And then this, what's kind of happens in the background for people like me and Colin and our science partners at New Mexico State and at Highlands University, and those are the experts in actually growing the seedlings and giving us the best advice on how to plant them successfully. We'll all be able to kind of see the data you collect and see where you're finding successfully some good cones and so forth. And so there's a couple of ways to log in, but I'm going to recommend, if you choose to join us here, is that you just, all you have to do in your search engine is type in TreeSnap and it'll come right up. And then you can basically register. And what I've done is I've created a group called PEEC. And the way that I think it's supposed to work, and this is something that we'll find out ourselves, honestly, by working with you, we're trying to understand the whole system, and which is why the beta test is so important to us, is that I would invite, if you're willing to share your email address with me, I will invite you to be part of the PEEC group. And then we'll be able to see each other's data and kind of see where you've gone. And if you've seen some things that look like they might be potential for cone searches or something, then that is what we will use that information to guide us. So I'm going to stop sharing and we can go on to the app itself.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Anne. So we'll see how we can make this work. So I'm going to actually share the app on my phone. So hopefully everybody can see in just a second my phone pop up here with a few of my other apps. And you can see the TreeSnap one there down at the bottom. So once I tap onto the actual app, you can, a species list comes up. And so you can see the American chestnut, which Anne talked about. Some of the other trees in here, the other species are all very eastern kind of Appalachian trees. So super interesting stuff. But the one that we're focused on for this beta test is pinyon pine. And we chose pinyon pine for a couple reasons, but mostly because we have, when we mentioned earlier about our seed banks being really depleted, we literally have almost no pinyon pine seed. And so we chose that because we've identified that as being one of the highest need species, as well as a really important species for wildlife and communities. So if we can get some pinyon pine planted in the next couple years, that'll be a huge success. And if we can just get some seed sources identified, that'll go a really long way. So what you can see is that once you the way it works is it's pretty simple. You just say, okay, I'm going to do pinyon pine. So we tap on the pinyon pine. And then if we were all out in the field, this would be more interesting. But what we really want is a photo. So you can tap on the photo, and then I'll take a picture of this not pinyon pine here out my window. And you can see that that loads up, and then just you can review your photo and say, yep, looks good, and we'll hit done. And then we won't walk through all of these necessarily, but it's all pretty straightforward, and it's pretty user friendly. So hopefully, it all makes sense. And again, we're not asking anybody to be perfect guessers here. So how tall is a tree? I look at it and I say, oh, it's about a basketball hoop plus a bit. So maybe it's 12 feet high. You can switch your units here to meters if that's how you think. And so then you can hit confirm. Tree diameter is the same thing. So if you're walking around with a diameter tape or a ruler, you can measure it, or you can just estimate. You can also pop up examples, which is really helpful. So that's the other neat thing about this app is it's got some pictures in there to help walk you through some of the estimates. So I'm going to estimate, it's about 30 inches in diameter. So you hit, oh man, I'm messing up. I don't know how many centimeters it is. It's been a long time since I did centimeters. So, oh, I see. It's doing circumference. Okay, cool. So you hit that. Then canopy cones. Again, this is an estimate of percentage. So this is your best guess in terms of how many, what percentage of the canopy is covered in cones. Typically, I think most commonly we're going to see somewhere in the 50 to 75% range. This question here is a question about cones. So this is really important. Actually, this is probably one of the most important pieces of the data that we are asking you to collect. So I'll go through it real slowly. So basically what it's asking is the ripeness of the cones. So we want to be able to identify cones as they're starting to ripen so that we can get crews together, get volunteer efforts lined out. And so we really want to be down in this, 100% green or purple cones is ideal. That's what we want to select. But we do want information, regardless of what the state is of your cones, even 100% brown and open, which is what we might be entering into now. So again, as we open this up, it brings up a suite of pictures, and you can see down at the bottom a description. So this is a pinyon pine cone that's closed, but it's brown. And so it's on its way to opening up, and it's pretty, it's already started to pull all the nutrients out of the cone. So it's already on its way to dropping those seeds. Here's again another picture of cones that are closed up and still on the tree. Here's an open cone. So this would be something that's worth collecting, especially for this beta test. We would really want to know this. And so please collect when you see open cones like this. But from a seed collection standpoint, this is a month or maybe even a year past gone. At the end, you can see that big, nice, juicy seed in there. That's probably still a little bit past where we want, because it just kind of makes life a little bit inefficient when we send people out. We want to collect that guy before it opens up. And so I think, so we'll kind of be realistic and say a lot of ours are going to be 100% brown and open, just given that it's fall, kind of past that ripe season. Neighborhood cones, again, pretty straightforward. How healthy is it? Again, this is somewhat subjective, so use your best experience and your best judgment, and you can say, yes, neighborhood's healthy. This is where you could add comments about the neighborhood, or the tree. You can, walk through some of these other kind of like identifiers. This would be specific if we had like a tree that we were coming back to frequently. So I don't think we have to worry about this for this particular study. Under advanced options, what you'll see is you can mark your observation as public or private. So we'll make this one private because we don't want people thinking I'm so bad at tree identification that I'm mistaking yuccas for pinyon pine. But you can say, if you mark it as private, it will only come up to us, to the people in the group. And if you mark it as public, looks like there's a bit of a typo there we need to fix. But if you mark it as public, it'll show up on that big map that Anne had shown, right away from the Kentucky area. And then once you hit, we'll hit save to finish. But before that, I just wanted to tap again. So this is all the information, or the data collection screen. And then this is the information. So I'm just toggling between the two there by tapping on those, either the add entry words or the information word. And you can see a lot of kind of the description of why we're doing this, the description of the tree, the sort of the why we need your help portion under the challenges. You can see it, if you pull this up, you can see a distribution map, which is always kind of helpful and neat just to see how wide ranging pinyon pine is. And then you can pull up and see some identifying pictures. So again, feedback on any of this stuff, these pictures were helpful, these pictures weren't, these pictures might be improved or weren't that helpful. All that stuff is all information that we need. So it's just showing kind of how the pinyon pine looks on the landscape, how it looks as a big solitary bushy, kind of zoomed in again to the cones and to the needles and branches. And then again, this really important picture, we want to know when the trees are right there in that like purple to green category, so that we can start to get ready if it looks like it's going to be a good crop. So then we'll just, to save it out, we'll come back to the add entry page and just hit save. And then it drops it down on the map so you can see where I live. And we can upload it. So that'll upload the image. And Anne should be able to see that in her group now, since I've registered and accepted the invitation from her. And then we'll just go back and we can kind of come in to see my observations on the map, see a list of my observations, sort of see how that's going. So I do have the chance to come back in and edit if I hit save too early, or if I feel like, I didn't get one of these things quite right. I can also, delete this observation. So that's kind of the walkthrough. Again, you'll see that I am signed in as part of this work. So you can see there my address and email. So this is all linked. This is how my account is linked to the group that Anne has set up under PEEC on the tree snap. So I registered on treesnap.org, and then I signed in to the app on my phone. So that's pretty much it, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the app or about the project in general.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes this so critical, like Colin talked about mass years, or where there's lots of cones, where there aren't. But if you think about it, it's kind of like, you guys are kind of like a fire crew, right? So you're going to be going around, and there'll be a place where there may be some good cones, or some seeds might be there, and then people will kind of be able to follow on. And that's actually one of the things that we'll be doing next. If the app works well, if you like doing this kind of work, there may be some follow-on opportunities to do some cone collection as well. So we hope that this will be kind of a full-on opportunity for the community to get engaged. And it's not just the Forest Service, but there are multiple agencies involved. So anyway, we're excited to have a chance to work with you all. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, we do have a couple questions. So this one is, where should we look? Does it matter if the trees are on public or private property? National forest versus national monument, county, land. Do you have permissions to collect on those lands, or will you gain those in the future if they find relevant data?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it kind of depends if, you know, like I was talking to somebody at the state land office the other day, and because they lease their lands, you know, I would have to ask for a permit to go and do that. But if there was like a bumper crop, it's like, yeah, that's the great place to go, then let's do it. But if it's like behind the fence on Lannel, unless some of you have the ability to do that collection yourself, you know, that may not be as good. But then again, we might be able, they have a biology crew, you know, maybe they'd be willing to help us. So at this point, you know, the more accessible the land, the easier it is to get crews in. But if we have some unique situations where, you know, the public available lands are, the seed source is not so good, but there's just, for whatever reason, you know, a lot going on someplace else, we may be able to follow up. So, but good comments like that as you make the observations, that'll be helpful for us to kind of figure out those logistics as well.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, for sure, if it's on any kind of land that we think we could gain access to, let's learn about it. And if it's a matter of jumping through some hoops to get some permits, Ann and I are pretty used to that, so we can go through and get permits for public lands. I would say the only kind of caveat I would put is, you know, don't trespass, don't get crosswise with the national lab taking photos or something just for seeds. We don't want to get you guys in trouble on the seed hunt. So
so within reason.
So yeah, so I think for this thing, if you have permission or if you feel safe snapping some pictures, whatever land it is, go for it. And if we need permits, we'll deal with that as we need to.
And if it is, sorry, this is just a follow up. If it is private land, say it's like your neighbors, for instance, does the app have the opportunity to enter in the actual address, like in a note section, or?
Yeah, you can enter in the address, and then if you wanted to, you could mark it as private so that it would only be seen by Ann and us and the scientist partners, if you wanted to do it that way. I noticed just on that, it got pretty close. I think it did get my, it dropped that pin right in my front yard. So,
so now we can come find you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just, you know, I think, look at this as an opportunity to have an excuse to go hiking even more, you know.
Yeah.
So if what you like to do is go hike on public lands, this is great. And you can see what the distribution of the tree is. You know, there are geneticists that think about, well, you know, finding the right genetic stock. And so right now for the Southwest, the advice that we're getting is like, we can collect broadly and that would still be appropriate. Like if we wanted to plant in the lost conscious area. And then the other thing, just because I know, since we're talking about pinon and how much we all love pinon, we would never go to some place and, you know, wipe out like your collecting spot. Right. We're also involved in conversations for the conservation of Pinyon Jay that's reliant on pinon. And so we understand, you know, it's not just our reforestation project that is important. So we would always, especially if seed was limited, make sure that we collected small amounts. And what's really neat is how long the seeds live. So we can accumulate over time for a larger project because they keep them in these really super cold freezers. And like Colin was saying, like, we're still growing trees from the late 70s, early 80s, or kind of getting close to the end of their viability, but we can accumulate over time.
And I think to finish up the private land conversation or the neighborhood conversation, we probably would want to go further afield, you know, out into the actual wild to collect the seed, just because it's hard to trace back. We don't want to collect from an ornamental, or we don't want to collect from something that's been planted, you know, so we want that genetic stock to be natural and wild, to the, you know, to the greatest extent possible. So we probably wouldn't be collecting in neighborhoods, or, you know, from that beautiful pinon in your front yard, just because it's hard to trace back how it got there.
Cool. Thank you. So this question was, should we select private for all entries to prevent pinon pickers from accessing the trees?
Anne, go ahead.
And Anna, I want to let you know that your audio is going a little bit in and out. Like you get quiet and then you, so.
I'm sorry. Okay.
No, you're good.
Okay, great. So, you know, that's a really good question, because we have set up a unique group. So if it's private to the group, that I should think that would be fine. Let's try that, and we'll look on the back end, and if we have advice to make the data more public, we can do that. But if we all sign up to be within the PEEC group, that should allay that, because I totally get what you're saying. And like rare plants or anything else, you're always kind of trying to figure out what to make public and what not, just because of potential risk to those locations, or just because they're great and you want to be able to collect yourself. I understand that.
Okay, and I also had a question myself just about signing up. We have a couple more, but this is relevant to what you just said. Is it possible for people to go on, if they're registering for TreeSnap on the website, and try to ask to be a part of the group? So I'm wondering if, like, you know, yes, okay, cool.
Yeah, so you can, if you once you register, you'll see a section on the side that says groups. So if you want, we could, let me just pull the website back up and I can show you what my registration looks like. So yeah, so you can see, so here, over here on groups, you can actually click on the PEEC and see who's in it. And then it'll give you a chance to exit. But you can also come back here and join a group. So this is where you would type in PEEC, and it's just saying no results found because I'm already in it. But then you can hit join, and then that'll send an email to Anne as the owner of the group, and she'll then approve you.
Okay.
So there's two ways Anne will invite you if you share her email, if you share your email with her, or if you sign up later, you can join this PEEC group.
Awesome, thank you. And then we also have a question about what is the best time of the year to look for trees for this project?
Well, we would probably, you know, when it goes real time, we'd be looking for them. What do you think, Colin? Like early to midsummer?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then be collecting, you know, in the early to mid fall. Yeah.
So the cones start to develop. You know, it's a multi-year process actually, but the final cone will start to develop early monsoon season. So July, August kind of time frame, and it'll be about the size of your thumb, maybe a little bit smaller, and it'll just start to kind of bud out and grow from there. And I think we want to be tracking it. It's really interesting to see, you know, the cone production is step one, and then there's actually a seed production step that happens inside the cone. And so all of those things are really weather dependent. And so I think we want to be tracking all of that. And then Anne's right, we would collect, I think we collected in 2019 off of Ponderosa Pine in November. So it was, like, you know, typical New Mexico, it was hot. And then when we finally got everybody together to go and collect, it snowed. So they were collecting in the snow, which was funny. But so this is still a good time that, you know, had it not been so ridiculously dry this year, we could still be seeing some green or just, you know, brown opening cones right about now.
Okay. Awesome.
But I think, but let me just stress, for the purpose of this beta test, let's collect everything from now on, like from now on. So open, you know, if you see open cones, if you see a big tree with a bunch of cones on the ground, like let's be doing that just so we can get some observations in the system and get it tested out so that we're humming for next year.
Okay. So there's a question that I think is like, actually, I'm very curious about this one. Would data, so someone will be traveling to SoCal and Arizona soon, and would that data be relevant and useful for like this project if they collect
Maybe
it?
not as much for our project unless we kind of build our network out bigger. That's a great question. And it could be that far afield where there are some good cones, but right now we're kind of we're hoping, you know, I'll just tell you right now, we're kind of an ad hoc team, right? Mm-hmm. So we had a big cone year last year, you know, cone scramble to get some people together to go collect. So we were able to get 350,000 seeds, which was fantastic, but it was fairly local. But I can tell you that there's a lot of interest west-wide in nursery development and reforestation opportunities because of exactly what Colin is saying. But so in the future, that kind of data might be super helpful. But right now for our New Mexico-based project for the HEMIS, it's kind of a small crew. So probably feel free to add the data. I mean, if you're just playing with the app, right? It's still just the beta test. So we're just like, oh, did that work or did it not work? Or would you recommend people take pictures a different way or what have you? So don't worry about that for this year. But when we get to like, you know, if you are all still interested and we do the real rollout, then we'll probably have more of a distance criterion for ourselves.
Okay.
But there is a pretty, like Ann was saying, there is a pretty broad distribution of where we would want to collect from. So, you know, SoCal might be out, but, you know, certainly the Sangres aren't. And, you know, even down into the East Mountains and around the Grants area, like we would probably collect all from, you know, basically probably all of New Mexico, Southern Colorado, you know, into Arizona, as long as we're still in the same species of you know, Pinus edulis, we would probably collect from that range.
Document. Okay, awesome. So before the last question, I'm just going to allow Mariana to introduce herself because she's going to be working closely on this project as well.
Thanks, Kristen, and thank you, Colin and Ann, for all of this tutorial, and thank you for everybody who's joined us. So my name is Mariana. I'm an educator, but also the PEEC field science specialist. So I work on all sorts of field science initiatives, mostly with schools, but I'm also working on some ideas to get a citizen science or community science sort of hub going at PEEC, and this was the perfect start to that. I'm kind of piggybacking on your work, Ann and Colin, but you know, appreciating that you guys are giving us this opportunity to see where this goes, and hopefully, you know, we can also be a resource for you guys as well as the community when it comes to citizen science and community science projects. I think this one's the perfect way to start. So thanks, Kristen, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, so last question, and I think you sort of answered this already, but is collecting data anywhere in New Mexico okay? I'm in Albuquerque and hike in the Sandias, Manzanos, and Zunis, in addition to the HEMIS.
Perfect. Snap away.
Do it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's part of this, like that's part of the way we're making lemonade out of the lemons of 2020, right? Is like this platform, we're doing this on Zoom instead of in the wonderful, PEEC Nature Center, right? And so we're able to reach across the whole state. And so let's collect data across the whole state. And again, like Ann said, right now we're focused on the Jemez Mountains, but we have fires in the Gila, we have fires in the Sandias, in the Manzanos. Like we're going to need seed from all over to do this work effectively over the long term. So yeah, snap away. Let's find some seeds in 2021. That's the goal.
Truth. Okay, so last question is, how do we get our emails to Anne to allow her to invite us? Do you mind if I share your email in the chat right now, Anne? TNC, so it's coming your way right now. And we'll also make sure to put the email in the thank you email that's going out after this presentation.
Super. And just for fun, if you're interested, Colin, we steal with pride from all our partners, and we allow them to do that for us too. So there, you may see some of the slides, but we sponsored an online presentation by Dr. Owen Burney from New Mexico State that talked about the seed pipeline and the needs and so forth. So if you want to see more of what Colin offered, or you want to share it with others, if you go to our New Mexico TNC website, it is posted, that video is posted, and it goes more into the science and just what they're trying to do. And what's really exciting right now is there are a lot of folks within the state at state forestry and elsewhere that are really thinking about how we can ramp up nursery production and so forth. So you all are on the cutting edge. So we appreciate it that you're going to provide great input, not only for this very specific project, but for reforestation in New Mexico in a broader way.
Yeah, and I just posted a link in the chat that'll take you right there.
Cool, and I'm going to copy that and make sure it makes it into the email as well. Cool. Well, great, awesome. It looks like we are done with everyone's questions. Thank you to Anne and Colin for being very concise and specific in your instructions. I loved it. And I hope that we can get something going. So
yeah,
again,
us too.
Yeah.
And thanks to PEEC so much for this. This is just, it's really great. We've been talking about engaging everybody on this project and making sure that I can't say enough how much I love the Pajarito Environmental Education Center. It's a great resource for New Mexico, not just Los Alamos.
We didn't pay him to say that. I just want you to know. But yeah, we appreciate this partnership a lot as well. And again, if anyone has any questions that tuned in today, please feel free to email. And Colin, do you mind if I include your email in that?
Nope, go for it.
Okay,
yep.
Cool. And myself or Mariana too, if you, we're all on, Mariana and my email is on the PEEC website. And I'll also put it in the email that's going out to everybody. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and I hope that you'll join this project. It's pretty awesome.
Thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Awesome, have a good one.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.